Hey, what's up, everyone? This is Drew, and I want to welcome you back to the Learn How to See Better podcast. And in today's episode, we're going to talk about something that affects all of us at one point or another in our lives, or it could be every day, or at least somebody that we know or care about, and that is the subject of anxiety. Yes, just the word alone, the way it rolls off the tongue, probably have some folks listening right here, right now, cringing a little bit at the thought of it, because when you think about anxiety and what it really is, that's something that we want to talk about today, but as well as trying to identify the common sources of anxiety, because if you can be a little bit wiser about identifying what creates anxiety in your world, you can take better steps to avoid it or address it. And I'll give you some approaches to consider there. But first off, thinking about anxiety and what it is, just step back and think about it. It's just a fear. It's a fear of something that hasn't happened yet. And in particular, it's a fear of something negative that hasn't happened yet, right? I don't want to be late for this event. I don't want to miss some other deadline. I don't want this negative thing to happen. And it's investing energy into an occurrence and an outcome of an occurrence that hasn't even occurred. And it's something that you don't want. And even though it's happened to all of us, when you actually think about it, it sounds kind of foolish. You're essentially creating a future result in your mind that you don't want. And it's just bugging you out. And it's to the point where, a lot of people experience this on a daily basis. And it's one of the most common reasons that, that it's necessary or people feel it's necessary to look to heavy sedation methods just to be able to address some of the anxiety. But in a lot of instances, once we identify and just kind of get real about what anxiety is, in some instances, it's just, in my opinion, the devil working out against you as you look to achieve your goals. You're always going to be met with resistance. Every hero's got to have an adversary. So as you're on your journey, you're going to have scenarios and potential outcomes to situations that maybe put a little bit of, that spook you a little bit. And that's fair enough. But the idea that, anxiety can be a pretty controlling force, and we can literally build walls inside of our minds that block us from taking forward action towards a goal. And, having witnessed it, firsthand experience and experience, in a variety of instances and people and situations in the world, it's very powerful. But when you think about just the simple fact that if you address it for what it is and say, okay, well, how do I get past that? Regardless of the type of anxiety that you're feeling or what the source is, it's important to kind of just take a moment to say, okay, what's the desired outcome I'm looking for? And try to channel as much energy into that as you are into the undesirable outcome, right? I can tell you countless times when I used to travel quite a bit, and I would, just be concerned that, hey, I don't want to miss this flight. I don't want to miss this flight. And you put that energy in the atmosphere, and all of a sudden everybody in front of you is driving a little bit slower. It seems like that's the one time that the airline's traveling on time and even looking to push back early. And, it just doesn't serve you well, because in a lot of instances you're suffering an outcome that you don't have to. And it's a self-imposed punishment. And that's just something that can be very draining on your energy. And when you think about, some of the common, reasons people, deal with the anxiety, they can be from so many different things, but some of them may have to do with things like preparation for an event. Maybe you have a big speech. Maybe you have a big test, right? You generally, I remember, and back in college, it's like I would have anxiety for a test coming up because I didn't properly prepare. Let's just call it for what it was in a lot of cases. And in life, if we have something for work or career related, or there's something we need to do where we're expected to perform, and if we're thinking about some bad outcome that might happen, what if they ask me the question I don't know the answer to? Or, what if they do this? What if they do that? There's this power given to this they figure, or this scenario that again doesn't exist yet, and it becomes all mighty, unfortunately. But when you're very prepared for whatever you're going into, there's the saying of the 6 P's, right? The, proper planning prevents piss poor performance. Well, it makes a lot of sense here. I think, especially in performance-based situations, whether it's athletics or academics, if you've properly prepared and been very thorough in your preparation, you're going to address a lot of that anxiety, because the what if scenarios you've already dealt with, you've already rehearsed for. Okay, what if they blitz on 3rd and long? Okay, we have an extra blocker in the backfield to protect the quarterback on this particular play, or whatever the case may be. What if the professor decides to throw a curveball and teach something different that wasn't in the homework? Great. Well, just make sure you've consumed all the material, and you're going to be best positioned to answer that question. So in a lot of instances, proper preparation is going to be the big differentiator in how you feel about your performance upcoming, and you'll have the answer to a lot of the questions that you might be asking yourself. What if this happens? What if that happens? What if it's snowing? What if it's raining? How's my performance going to be adjusted by my environment? But if you prepared properly, you're going to have a lot less energy to need to channel into that, because you've addressed a lot of those situations on the advance up front. Another thing that can be done to address anxiety is to try and listen to your feelings when you're going through it. This one's definitely easier said than done, but if you've ever found yourself getting hot under the collar about a situation, maybe you're angry, or someone's maybe said something to offend you, and you feel this tension build up inside of you, it's important to recognize what you're feeling and to try and make sense of it and listen objectively. It sounds kind of crazy, but you have to step outside of the moment and be willing to separate yourself from a situation, just kind of understand how you're behaving or how you're responding, and what is the reason that your blood's beginning to boil, or that you're getting hot under the collar, or you're finding the hair on the back of the neck stands up because you're called on unexpectedly to do something. It's what is that feeling coming from? Is it a lack of preparation for an unexpected situation, or is it an unexpected encounter with someone you weren't expecting to see, that there might be some unresolved tensions there? It could be a variety of things, but listening to your feelings, you can make sense of those. Even if not in the moment, you can make sense of those feelings later, and that's going to help you to really sort it through. Because if you find that you deal with anxiety on a regular basis, it's one thing where you want to know, obviously, what are these triggers? What makes me feel this way? Because most people are going to tell you that anxiety is a negative feeling, and it's something that you want to get away from. It's unpleasant. That's why we avoid situations that give us anxiety. But even in those instances, you want to remain aware of what's going on, and you want to remain in control as best you can, because if you're listening to this, you're probably an adult, and you recognize that there's a certain maturity to handling situations, even if you feel very uncomfortable. And just learning how to control your breathing, and if possible to get some fresh air. Just give your brain a fair shot at being able to process the current experience. It was just literally over a month ago that my 3rd-born son was being brought into the world, and that day is full of anticipation. It's a positive feeling based on an outlook of something that hasn't happened yet. So it's similar to anxiety, but it's very positive. But still, the butterflies in this tummy feel kind of like anxiety, and it's important to understand the scenario you're in. Yeah, in a situation like childbirth, there are some crazy thoughts that might run through your head as far as what ifs, but you recognize that you're only in so much control of the situation, and you've got the trusted hands, of the doctors that are bringing the baby into the world. So it is a scenario where you have to look at those, the outcome that you actually want, and put your energy there, as opposed to, think about some crazy what if that just drains you and is so far-fetched when compared to what you actually want, that it doesn't make sense to let thoughts like that rent space in your head. So listening to your feelings, remaining aware, being in control, making sure you've got a positive outlook. Anyone that knows me for any length of time's known positive outlook, positive outcome. That's one of the things I've said for so long, because I think it really does have to do with being able to get what you want out of life. If you think you're going to have a positive outcome, if you have a positive outlook about it, you're going to be that much more likely to get that end result. Don't believe me? Take the other side of the equation. Do you think folks that have a negative outlook tend to have a negative outcome? I would say probably so. And it's so important to look at that, because as when it comes to a source of anxiety, when is a source of anxiety most common and highest? Sunday night, Monday morning. I mean, unfortunate as it is, statistically, the highest rate of heart attacks are Monday mornings. And people have made jokes about it. Some people would rather die than to go to work again. But the reality part of that is that there are so many situations where the anxiety is real and it's peaked. People are doing things that they don't want to do and unhappy in that situation. And pressure bust pipes. It is a real thing. And if you find yourself in a window or chapter of life where you have anxiety on those Monday mornings, start to look at what your Sunday evening routine is like. Maybe there's things that you can do that you can incorporate in your lifestyle that act as de-stressors. Maybe it's a walk around the block after dinner, just help the blood flow, to ease your mind, to help relax, and be able to plan and help prepare for the week ahead and help address some of that anxiety. Because in a lot of instances, if anxiety is running rampant in your life, you probably feel out of control, like maybe life is just happening to you and that you haven't been controlling what's going on in your world. And those tend to trigger times where you really recognize it might be useful to take a time out. And in the worst case scenario, go ahead, fine, let your mind go and just go to that undesired place. Okay, that's really bad. Yep, it's horrible. It's awful. Now snap back out of it and get back to focusing on what you want, because that's really one of the ways to try and just, from a brute force standpoint, address anxiety. Hey, look, I'm not going to let my mind run wild with the situation being, paralyzed by a fear of something negative that has not happened yet. You have to actually outwit the devil of the situation that's taking over, and use that to your advantage, because we really control a lot of the experiences that we go through with regards to how we feel internally, and whether the facts that we face in the world and what our focus is on those, and whether or not we're going to get a good vibe or a bad vibe from them. And so it's our mentality, our outlook, our mindset that we have to really try to police and autocorrect as best we can as we learn how different situations in life affect us. Some people have more anxiety about interactions with people in certain people-based situations. There's ways to address that, right? There's ways to be able to address situations if you feel you're going to deal with someone that's difficult. Well, if that's an instance where you can expect that, you can think through scenarios in advance and kind of diffuse those ahead of time so that they don't rear their ugly head in the heat of battle and really get you feeling wound up unnecessarily. Again, I've talked about how preparation can be one key element of addressing anxiety, because hey, if you stay ready, you never have to get ready, and then you're never shaken up, right? So that's just another scenario where you can address anxiety heads on by being wise in your actions ahead of time. And that's just one of those smart things. And last but not least, making sure to recognize that if you feel helpless and out of control and your mind is just going to a dark place, if you feel that out of control, fine, let go of the reins for just a couple of seconds. Run away, baby, right? Fine. If your mind's going off the cliff, then since it's just creating imaginary nonsense anyways, go ahead and take it off that cliff. And then once you're over that and you recognize what that worst case scenario is, that's probably a 1% chance of anything of actually happening, let it go. and be able to slap yourself silly and kind of snap out of it to get your mind back on track, to focusing on what you really want, because that's really the way to take control of a situation like that. And granted, some of these things are easier said than done, but what I've also found is that when we deal with anxiety in our lives, if it seems like it's a rampant force in your world, that means it's recurring. And if it's recurring, that's typically indicating that it's cyclical or a handful of things that drive the anxiety. And for that reason, it makes sense to take a deeper look and a deeper dive into what those instances are, so you can really learn to understand it and see better, and be able to analyze the anxiety and see what's the cause, what's the driver, how you can address or sidestep those situations, to be able to put either a more positive spin on situations you have to go through anyway, or to be able to avoid and adjust some of those scenarios altogether. So while anxiety is a real thing, and I recognize that all of us can suffer from it, I've seen instances where I've had to deal with it. I've seen instances where others have to deal with it. And I've seen instances where it could be a situation that shuts someone down. But if you're able to, outsmart or outwit or see through or beyond the scenario causing the anxiety, right? And start to shift the perspective on a set of facts with the right focus, you're going to be able to redirect those thought vibes and those brain waves to generate a more positive response, or to, at minimum, eliminate or reduce the presence of negative anxiety and its contribution to stress-related illnesses in your world. So hopefully this is one of those instances where you can gather some insight from this podcast. I don't claim to be a doctor, but hey, you know what? I think we also all know that what's real and what's not, and anxiety is something that can be avoided. It doesn't necessarily have to require medication or sedation. It just requires better insight, which might need a little bit of better information about what some of its causes are. And since we all know a lot of it's driven by lifestyle and the things in our world, we just have to take stock of that and learn to see those situations better, so we can make adjustments that are best for us. So just a couple of tips that they might prove useful for somebody out there who could be dealing with something like this, or know someone who is. It could give a different perspective and help you find it useful. But until next time, keep it tuned in and keep it locked, and be sure to share this with a friend and subscribe for more information just like this. And until next time, we will catch you on this podcast, and thanks for listening in. Well, all right. That was some great content, wasn't it? Well, thank you. I appreciate that. I'm glad you liked it. This is your host, Drew Davis, and I want to thank you for listening to the Learn How to See Better podcast today. And don't forget to subscribe and tune in for future episodes, and be sure to share with a friend if you are enjoying this content. Thanks, and see you next time.
The podcast you just heard was made using Anchor. Ever thought about making your own podcast? Anchor makes it really easy for anyone to get started. It's a one-stop shop for recording, hosting, and distributing podcasts. Best of all, it's 100% free. Sign up now at anchor.fm/new. That's anchor.fm/new to get started.